I stood behind the shatterproof glass of the International Arrivals Hall at JFK, about 20 feet from the Customs and Border Protection checkpoint. The air hummed with the electric buzz of 1,000 reunions, the screech of luggage wheels on tile, and the disembodied voice of the announcer calling out final boarding calls. Yet, through it all, the CBP officer's words sliced through the noise and struck my husband, Mark, like a physical blow. Mr. Mark Peterson, your residency status has been flagged for revocation pending a federal investigation. You are inadmissible to the United States. Please come with us. I watched Mark freeze, the confident swagger draining from his body, leaving a pale, hollowed-out shell. Behind him, my mother-in-law, Carol, stood beside a luggage cart piled high with designer shopping bags. The thick layer of foundation on her face seemed to crack under the harsh fluorescent lights as her perfectly painted red lips parted in a silent, horrified gasp. She lunged forward, her voice a shrill tear in the fabric of the terminal's calm. "What are you talking about? My son is a vice president. He's a respected businessman. How dare you restrict his entry?" A swarm of 12 family members crowded behind them, a chaotic chorus of shouts, curses, and panicked sobs erupting like a hornet's nest kicked over. I didn't step forward. I just stood there, my fingernails digging into my palms, watching the man who had once promised to hold my hand for the rest of our lives frantically search for an escape that didn't exist. In that moment, I felt a strange, hollow lightness in my chest. 3 months ago, I couldn't have imagined witnessing this scene. That day was a Sunday morning with the kind of soft, hazy sunlight that makes a New York City apartment feel like the calmest place on earth. I was sitting on the balcony of our condo, my laptop open to a design blueprint, a cup of coffee growing cold beside me. Mark's phone, lying on the table, buzzed once. The screen lit up, and a text notification popped up for a split second, impossible to ignore. "My love, last night was incredible. I'm still sore this morning." I felt a jolt, as if someone had poured ice water down my spine. The sender's name was Jessica M., and the profile picture was a girl with wide, filtered eyes and glossy, pouting lips, the kind of girl who looked at least 10 years younger than me. I quickly flipped the phone face down, my hand shaking, as if hiding the screen could somehow stop my world from exploding. Mark walked out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, the scent of the expensive sandalwood body wash I'd bought him trailing behind him. It was a scent that used to make me feel secure, a scent that meant my person. He toweled his hair, glanced at the phone, and picked it up without a second thought. I forced my voice to sound normal. "Busy at work lately, honey?" He glanced at the screen for a fraction of a second. I saw his brow twitch, then immediately relax into a smooth, practiced mask of indifference. "Yeah, it's been crazy. We have a team-building trip coming up next week. I probably won't be home this weekend." I looked out at the city, at the tops of the budding trees in the park below. "A team-building trip? Where to? Maybe the Keys?" "Not sure yet," he answered distractedly, his thumbs already tapping away at the screen. "I'm heading out now. Got a tea time with Frank." He disappeared into the bedroom to change. I sat motionless, my heart pounding a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I suddenly remembered something from the week before. While doing his laundry, I had found a matchbook from the Fontainebleau in Miami in the pocket of his suit jacket. When I'd asked about it, he'd breezily said he'd had a client meeting there, and I'd believed him. I believed him like someone who willingly puts on a blindfold. I picked up my phone, opened Instagram, and typed in the name Jessica M. It wasn't hard to find her. Her profile was public. I wasn't the type to stalk people online, but some unseen force compelled me to scroll. A few posts down, there it was. A selfie of her on a white sand beach, a distinctive curved palm tree, and a wooden sign in the background, the unmistakable signature of the Fontainebleau resort. Her caption read, "Weekend getaway with my favorite person is less than 3. I heard the clinking of hangers in the closet and the soft thud of a dresser drawer closing. A question echoed in my mind with terrifying clarity. If it was a company trip, why did his favorite person happen to be at the exact same resort during his client meeting? I stood up and walked to the bedroom door. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I just spoke loud enough for him to hear. "Mark?" "What?" he answered, his voice slightly annoyed. "You said you had a client meeting last weekend. Why did Jessica post a picture from the same resort in Miami you mentioned?" There was a short, sharp silence, the kind that happens right before a car crash. He walked out, his shirt half-buttoned, his face tight. Her department was there too. The company organized it. "Why are you asking?" I managed a small, cold smile. Then there must be an official announcement. "I'll just check with HR to see what the budget was for that trip." His expression changed. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a look I'd never seen before, the look of a stranger evaluating a threat. "Don't you have better things to do?" "No, I don't," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "I just don't like being treated like an idiot." His phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then grabbed his jacket. "Emergency at the office. Don't wait up for dinner." The front door slammed shut, and the sound of the elevator descending was like a mournful sigh. I stood alone in the living room, looking at the home we had built over 5 years. Suddenly, everything felt foreign and cold, as if the warmth had been sucked out of the room, leaving behind nothing but an empty stage. That evening, at 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. I assumed it was Mark, having forgotten his keys. But when I opened the door, it was my mother-in-law, Carol. She was dressed in a tailored sheath dress, her hair perfectly coiffed, her high heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a judge's gavel. "Why are you here at this hour, Carol?" I asked, trying to remain polite. She pushed past me, her eyes scanning the living room with a disdainful air before settling on me. Her lips curled into a smirk. "I came to see what my brilliant daughter-in-law does that makes her husband so stressed he can't even have a peaceful weekend." I closed the door, a knot tightening in my stomach. "He's just busy with work, Carol." She laughed, a short, sharp sound without any humor. She ran a manicured finger across the coffee table and held it up as if it were covered in dust. "Busy with work, or busy finding a decent meal because he doesn't get one at home. A man needs a wife who knows her place." I clenched my fists. I had heard this speech, in various forms, for 5 years. She never saw the late nights I spent on my own design projects, the deadlines I met, the income I contributed. She only saw a wife who wasn't fulfilling the correct, traditional role. She sat down on the sofa, opened her designer handbag, and pulled out a small velvet box, pushing it across the table toward me. "I had this made for my first grandchild." She paused, her eyes locking onto my stomach with an accusatory glare. A real shame. I swallowed hard. Our 5-year struggle with infertility had been the noose around my neck. We'd seen specialists. The results were clear. The issue was with Mark. But in the theater of our family, the blame was always placed squarely on me. I was the one who was barren, the one who couldn't fulfill her duty, and Mark's silence on the matter was the knife that twisted deepest. I turned away, feigning calm. "Let me get you some water." "Don't bother," she snapped. "I'm here for Mark's passport." I spun around. "His passport? Why didn't he get it himself?" "He's busy," she replied dismissively. "The company is sending him on an overseas survey. A wife should be helping her husband, not asking stupid questions." She stood up and walked directly into our bedroom, rummaging through it as if it were her own. I followed, my heart pounding. Mark had always told me that only he knew the combination to the safe in our home office, but I watched as Carol confidently keyed in a sequence of numbers. The safe clicked open. She retrieved the passport and tucked it into her purse. My own voice sounded hoarse. "How did you know the code?" She turned, her eyes cold as steel. "It's his birthday. You think a mother doesn't know her own son's birthday?" She walked past me, the scent of her strong, cloying perfume filling the air. "Worry about being a wife, dear. Stop snooping through phones and meddling with his colleagues." She let herself out, leaving me standing in the silent hallway. A horrifying thought snaked its way up my spine. If she could walk in here, open our safe, and take his passport as if it were the most natural thing in the world, then who was I in this marriage? What was my role in this elaborate play? That night, Mark didn't come home. At 3 a.m., he sent a text. "Sudden business trip. Back next week." I stared at the screen until it went dark. In the blackness of the room, I felt a tear slide down my cheek, cold against my skin. But the thing that scared me wasn't the tears. It was the terrifying clarity that was blooming in my mind, a slow, burning fire. I sat up, opened my laptop, and started digging. I pulled up our joint bank accounts, our credit card histories, every unusual expense I had previously ignored. I thought of the matchbook. I thought of Mark's panicked eyes when I said Jessica's name. I thought of Carol opening that safe as if she'd done it 100 times before. In the dead quiet of the apartment, pierced only by the low hum of the refrigerator, I finally understood. This wasn't just an affair. It was an exit plan. And if I continued to play the part of the good, understanding wife, I would be the one left behind penniless, silenced, and blamed for not being able to keep my husband. I looked at the spreadsheet of our finances, then out the window at the first gray light of dawn breaking over the city. I spoke the words out loud to the empty room, slowly, as if nailing them to the floor. I will not be silent anymore. And that was the moment I decided to find the truth, no matter the cost. From the moment Carol's perfume faded from the hallway, a strange calm settled over me. The terror that had gripped me in the morning didn't disappear. It crystallized into something cold, hard, and clear. I was no longer a wife wondering if her husband was cheating. I was a woman standing in the middle of a conspiracy, and I was the target. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury, a currency I could no longer afford. My mind, for the first time in months, was razor sharp. I walked over to the window, looking down at the bustling New York street, and understood with chilling certainty that if I continued to be the trusting, understanding wife, I would be erased. My name, my contributions, my 5 years of marriage, all of it would be deleted as cleanly as Carol had retrieved that passport. I picked up my phone. My first and only call was to Sarah. She was my best friend from law school, now a litigator so sharp she could fillet you with a deposition. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. Em, it's 6 a.m. Is the building on fire? Something like that, I said, my voice steady, which surprised even me. I need you, Sarah, the lawyer you. An hour later, we were huddled in a corner booth of an all-night diner, the smell of stale coffee and bacon hanging in the air. I laid it all out, the text, the Miami matchbook, Carol's key, the passport. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression shifting from sleepy concern to a focused, icy glare. She didn't offer condolences. She just slid the salt shaker to the side and said, bank statements, joint accounts, credit cards, everything. Now. That afternoon, we sat in her office conference room, surrounded by stacks of paper, what I had previously seen as the normal ebb and flow of a successful couple's finances, Sarah saw as a battlefield. Look here, she said, her pen circling a $5,000 withdrawal from 6 weeks ago. The memo line read, client hosting. And here, 2 weeks before that, $7,500 for project development. She lined up 5 similar transactions over the past 4 months, all for large, round sums, all with explanations so vague they were meaningless. These aren't business expenses, Emily. These are cash withdrawals disguised as business expenses. He's draining the account, slowly enough that you wouldn't notice. The words hit me harder than the text message. This was calculated. This was theft. What do I do? I whispered. Sarah looked me straight in the eye. You gather evidence. And you do not, under any circumstances, let him know that you know. We're past saving the marriage. This is about saving you. That's when she recommended David. He was a private investigator, a former NYPD detective who specialized in complex marital asset investigations. His office was a small, nondescript room in a building in Queens, and he had the tired, patient eyes of a man who had seen every flavor of human betrayal. I told him everything. He listened, took a few notes, and said in a quiet, gravelly voice, "You want to know where he is and where the money is going. I'll get you a preliminary report in 3 days." The wait was agonizing. I went through the motions of life. I went to my design studio. I talked to clients. I came home to the apartment I now saw as a stage set for a play in which I was the only one who didn't know her lines. Mark came home late, smelling of a different restaurant every night, his excuses about work becoming more elaborate, more theatrical. I played my part perfectly. I was the concerned wife, warming his dinner, asking if his day was stressful, never letting the slightest crack appear in my facade. On the third day, an email from David arrived. The subject line was simply, "Report." I locked my office door, my heart hammering against my ribs. There were a dozen photos. Mark, his arm wrapped tightly around Jessica's shoulders as they walked into a gleaming high-rise lobby in Brooklyn. Jessica, laughing as she swiped a key fob to call the elevator, her head resting on his chest. Them, together, carrying grocery bags, looking for all the world like a happy couple settling into their new home. Then came the text of the report. The apartment was a 2-bedroom with a view of the Manhattan skyline. Rent was $5,000 a month. The lease was signed 3 months ago, not in Mark's name, but under the name of his company, listed as a corporate housing expense. I sat back in my chair, the air leaving my lungs in a silent rush. He wasn't just cheating. He was building a whole new life, a parallel existence funded by our shared money. That night, I decided to push him, not with anger, but with questions. As we sat at the dinner table, I kept my tone light. "You seem so exhausted lately, honey. This big international project must be really taking a toll." He tensed up immediately. "It's a lot of pressure. We're in the final stages. Is it the one in Singapore you were talking about?" I asked, feigning innocent curiosity. A flicker of panic crossed his eyes before he masked it. "No, a different one. It's a European fund. Very complex." He was a terrible liar when you knew what to look for. He talked too much, adding unnecessary details, his hands fidgeting with his silverware. He built a fortress of words, and I let him, nodding and showing concern, all while my mind recorded every inconsistency. Later, as the sound of the shower echoed from the bathroom, a powerful intuition pulled me toward his home office. It was a room I rarely entered, respecting his need for space. But tonight, I knew something was in there. I didn't search frantically. I walked straight to his filing cabinet, to a drawer marked Archived. Inside, beneath old tax returns, was a plain manila folder with no label. My hands were shaking as I opened it. It was full of documents. Thick, official-looking application forms for a foreign investor visa program. It was a direct path to residency in another country. I flipped through the pages, and then I saw it. The main applicant, Mark Peterson, and listed as his dependent partner, the person who would receive a visa alongside him, Jessica Thorne. The sound of the water shutting off in the bathroom was like a gunshot in the silent apartment. I stood there, holding the proof in my hands. This wasn't just an affair to be hidden. It was an exit strategy. A meticulous, long-term plan to start a new life in a new country with a new partner. And I, his wife of 5 years, was not a person to be divorced. I was an asset to be liquidated and a liability to be left behind. The discovery of the visa application shifted something fundamental within me. The pain of betrayal, which had been a hot, searing agony, cooled into something far more dangerous: resolve. This was no longer a personal heartbreak. It was a strategic battle for my life. The life I had helped build, the assets I had contributed to, the future I had invested in, they were all being systematically dismantled and stolen from me. I wasn't just a wife being cheated on. I was a business partner being quietly and ruthlessly liquidated. The nights that followed were sleepless, but not from sorrow. They were spent in the quiet glow of my laptop screen, my apartment transformed into a war room. Every night, after Mark's steady breathing filled the bedroom, I would slip out and begin my work. I became a digital ghost, moving silently through our shared history, gathering the fragments of their conspiracy. I downloaded years of bank records, credit card statements, and investment portfolios. I created a timeline, cross-referencing Mark's business trips with Jessica's social media posts and the large, unexplained cash withdrawals. The pattern was undeniable. It was a meticulous, slow-motion heist. I photographed every document in his office, every scrap of paper, every business card. I saved every suspicious email and text message, creating a digital fortress of evidence. Nothing was too small. Everything was stored on two separate encrypted hard drives. One I hid in a hollowed-out book at my studio, the other I gave to Sarah. My trust had been atomized. I wasn't taking any more chances. A week later, Carol called. Her voice was like warm honey, a cloying sweetness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Emily, darling, it's been too long. We're having a family dinner on Sunday, just a casual get-together. We'd love to see you." I knew it wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. They needed to see me, to gauge my ignorance, to make sure the lamb was still silent. "Of course, Carol," I said, my voice perfectly pleasant. "I'll be there." I walked into their Tudor-style house in Westchester, feeling like an undercover agent entering hostile territory. The air was thick with the scent of roasted chicken and unspoken tensions. Mark was there, along with his father and his aunt, the whole inner circle. They greeted me with wide, false smiles and questions about my work that they had no interest in hearing the answers to. We sat at the long mahogany dining table, the same table where I had celebrated holidays and birthdays, feeling like a fool. Carol sat at the head of the table, a queen surveying her court. After a few minutes of strained small talk, she began, "You know, Emily," she said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin, "Mark and I were just talking the other day. 5 years is a long time. This big house feels so empty without the sound of children's laughter. The attack was so classic, so perfectly passive-aggressive, I almost had to admire its efficiency. She was painting me as the barren wife, the source of disappointment, the reason her son might need to look elsewhere for fulfillment. The entire table went quiet, all eyes on me. The old Emily would have flushed with shame, mumbled an apology, and shrunk into herself. The new Emily took a slow sip of water, placed her glass down with a soft click, and smiled. "That's a conversation for another time, Carol. Right now, I'm just so fascinated by this big overseas survey Mark is preparing for. It sounds like such a huge opportunity." The shift was palpable. I had refused to take the bait and had thrown a grenade of my own onto the table. Mark nearly choked on his wine. His father cleared his throat loudly. "Yes? Well, it's a very demanding project," his father mumbled, looking at Mark for a cue. "It's a preliminary market analysis." Mark jumped in, his voice a little too high. "We're exploring expansion into the European market." "Oh, that's wonderful," I said, my voice full of false enthusiasm. "So it's a company-wide initiative?" Carol cut in smoothly. "It's a very sensitive, high-level survey, dear. Only for senior management." They were a well-oiled machine of deceit, each one jumping in to patch the other's lies. But in their haste, their stories were a mess of tangled threads. It was a corporate survey, but it was sensitive. It was for the company, but only for them. Their eyes darted between each other, a silent, panicked communication passing around the table. In that moment, I saw it all with perfect, horrifying clarity. It wasn't just Mark and his mother, it was all of them. They were all in on it. They had sat around this very table and planned my obsolescence. I was the family's inconvenient truth, and they were all working together to delete me. I excused myself early, claiming a headache. The drive back to the city was a blur. The dinner hadn't broken me. It had forged the final piece of my resolve. They saw me as an obstacle, something to be managed and discarded. They were about to find out how big of an obstacle I could be. The next morning, a call from David added a new, terrifying dimension to their plan. "Got something for you, Emily," he said, his voice grim. "Mark and his mother were in Florida 2 weeks ago." Florida? They weren't on vacation. I got a source to pull the preliminary title report on a new development in Collier County. They finalized the purchase of a 4-bedroom house. Cash sale. My blood ran cold. Let me guess. Not in their name. Paid for by a wire transfer from a shell corporation Mark set up 6 months ago, David confirmed. And the title is "In the Name of a Third Cousin of Carol's who lives in Ohio." Clean as a whistle. They're not just leaving the country, Emily. They're hiding assets, and they're doing it fast. I hung up the phone and looked around the apartment, at the life I thought was mine. It was all a lie. Every piece of art, every piece of furniture was just a temporary prop. They weren't just building a new life. They were building a fortress to protect what they were stealing from me. My quiet, methodical evidence gathering was no longer enough. I was in a race against time. The news about the Florida property was the final alarm bell. They weren't just running, they were scorching the earth behind them, ensuring that by the time I realized what was happening, there would be nothing left but ash. The leisurely pace of my investigation was over. This was now a frantic sprint against a ticking clock. 2 days later, David called with the information that lit the fuse. "Emily, I got the date," he said, his voice stripped of its usual professional calm. "Your husband, his mother, and Jessica Thorne have their visa interviews scheduled." "When?" I asked, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. 2 weeks from today, at the consulate here in New York. This is the final step. After this, they're clear to transfer the bulk of their funds and leave. 2 weeks, 14 days. The number echoed in the sudden silence of my studio. Everything I had worked for, every piece of evidence I had gathered, would be worthless if they got on that plane. All my proof of their lies would mean nothing if the assets were gone and the perpetrators were on the other side of the world, sipping champagne in their new, stolen life. I immediately called Sarah. "They have a date," I said, the words coming out clipped and fast. "We're out of time." Sarah's response was instant and decisive. "Meet me at my office in an hour and bring the drives. It's time to pull the pin." The conference room, which had been our quiet sanctuary for analysis, now felt like a command center on the eve of battle. Sarah had already cleared her schedule. She had a junior associate pulling case law while she mapped out our strategy on a whiteboard. "We can't just file for divorce," she explained, her marker moving with sharp, angry strokes. "That's too slow. They'll be gone before the first hearing. We need a tactical strike. We're filing an emergency petition for a temporary restraining order. We're not just freezing the joint accounts. We're going after the business accounts he's been using to launder the money. Can we do that? He made the mistake of using corporate funds to pay for his girlfriend's apartment and to buy that house in Florida," she said with a grim smile. "He pierced the corporate veil. Now we get to rip it open." For the next 3 hours, we worked with a furious, focused energy. We assembled a package so damning it felt radioactive. The bank statements showing the slow, steady bleed of cash. The photographs of Mark and Jessica at their Brooklyn love nest. The rental agreement for that apartment, paid for by his company. The wire transfer records for the Florida property, funneled through the Shell Corporation. And the crown jewel, copies of their visa applications, an undeniable declaration of their intent to flee. It was a mosaic of greed and deceit, and it was airtight. By the end of the day, Sarah had filed the petition electronically with the court. "The storm is coming, Em," she said, her hand resting on my shoulder. "Are you ready?" "I'm ready," I said, and for the first time, I felt no fear, only a cold, hard certainty. The storm broke the next afternoon. I was at my studio, trying to focus on a design schematic, when my phone erupted. It was Mark. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. And again. On the 5th call, I answered, putting the phone on speaker. The voice that came through was not the smooth, controlled tone of my husband. It was the raw, guttural roar of a cornered animal. "What did you do?" He screamed, his voice cracking with disbelief and fury. "My accounts are frozen. The company's accounts. They're saying I can't touch anything. What the hell did you do, Emily?" I held the phone away from my ear, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum. "I protected myself, Mark," I said, my voice calm. "You should have thought of that. Protected yourself? You've just torpedoed my entire company. My business partners are calling. The bank is calling. You have no idea what you've just done." "Oh, I think I do," I replied softly. "I've stopped you." I ended the call before he could respond, my hand perfectly steady. The man who had meticulously planned my erasure was now in a blind panic because I had refused to be erased. An hour later, my doorman buzzed. "Ma'am, a Mrs. Peterson is here to see you. She seems very insistent. I knew this was coming. Send her up." When I opened the door, Carol stood there, her face a mask of incandescent rage. The perfectly coiffed hair, the expensive silk blouse, it was all there, but it was undone by the sheer venom in her eyes. She didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past me into the apartment. "You ungrateful little witch," she spat. her voice a low hiss. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You're trying to destroy my son." I closed the door quietly and turned to face her. "What you did for me was help your son systematically steal from me while planning to abandon me. Don't mistake that for kindness." Her jaw dropped. The pretense was gone. "He was going to provide for you," she shrieked. "He was going to give you a generous settlement once he was established." "You mean once the money was safely in another country and I had no legal recourse? That kind of generous settlement?" I asked. "You were never good enough for him." She finally screamed, her composure shattering completely. "A washed-up designer with no family name who couldn't even give him a child. You were a placeholder, and you were too stupid to even see it." I didn't flinch. I just stood there, letting her poisonous words wash over me. The old me would have been shattered, reduced to tears, but the new me felt nothing but a profound, clarifying pity. She wasn't a monster. She was just a desperate woman whose perfect plan had just blown up in her face. "Is that all, Carol?" I asked, my voice even. "Because if you're done, I have work to do." Her face contorted, and for a second, I thought she might strike me. Instead, she just turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture frame rattled on the wall. I stood alone in the sudden silence. The war was no longer a secret. It was out in the open, and the first shots had been fired by me. They had underestimated me. They had seen a quiet, compliant wife. They never imagined I could be a formidable opponent. That was their mistake. And it was going to cost them everything. The slam of my front door behind Carol was not an ending. It was the declaration of a new kind of war. The initial shockwave of the frozen accounts had been a blunt force attack. What came next was a more insidious form of combat, a slow, suffocating psychological siege. They had failed to break me with rage, so now they would try to grind me down with guilt. The campaign began the next morning. My phone started ringing, and it didn't stop. The first call was from Mark's aunt, a woman who usually only spoke to me at holidays. Her voice was syrupy with feigned concern. "Emily, dear, I heard there was some misunderstanding. I know you're upset, but you can't let your emotions get the better of you. Think of the family. You're tearing the family apart." I said nothing. "A man's reputation is all he has," she continued, her tone hardening slightly. "You wouldn't want to be the woman who destroyed a good man over a little mistake, would you?" "Thank you for your concern," I said, my voice as flat and empty as a dial tone, and hung up. An hour later, it was a mutual friend, a man from Mark's golf club. "Mark's in a real bind here. This legal thing, it's a mess. He told me he still loves you. He just made a stupid mistake. Can't you two just talk this out?" "Don't be so vindictive." They had their talking points. Emotional, vindictive, tearing the family apart. A little mistake. They were trying to build a narrative where I was the villain, the scorned, hysterical woman burning everything to the ground out of spite. They were trying to make me doubt my own sanity, to isolate me until I believed their version of reality. Mark himself was a master of this psychological whiplash. In the morning, I'd receive a long, pleading text message. "Emily, please." I messed up. I was scared and I made the worst mistake of my life. "Don't throw away 5 years. I know we can fix this. I still love you." But by the afternoon, after I failed to respond, a venomous voicemail would follow. "You have no idea the trouble you're in. You think you can take me on? You will walk away from this with nothing. I will make sure of it. You will regret the day you ever crossed me." The threats didn't scare me anymore. They were the desperate flailings of a man who had lost control. I saved every message, every voicemail, and forwarded them all to Sarah. They were just more bricks in the wall of evidence we were building. While they focused on my psyche, I focused on their actions. I kept David on the payroll, telling him to shift his focus from asset tracking to intelligence gathering. "They're desperate," I told him, "and desperate people get sloppy. I want to know what their next move is." A few days later, he called. "They're not just trying to pressure you," he said, his voice low. "They're trying to find leverage. They've hired someone, an opposition researcher. He's been making quiet calls to some of your former colleagues, even an ex-boyfriend from college. They're looking for dirt, Emily, anything they can use to discredit you. A cold dread washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by anger. Their arrogance was boundless. They were the criminals, yet they were trying to put me on trial. "Let them dig," I told David. "There's nothing to find." But their desperation did make them sloppy, just as I'd predicted. The mistake came from Mark's uncle, his father's brother and a silent partner in the business. He was a hot-headed man who saw himself as the family fixer. David called me late one night, an unusual urgency in his voice. "You need to hear this," he said, and played a recording. The audio quality was slightly muffled, but the voice was unmistakably the uncle's. He was talking to one of Mark's business partners, clearly trying to rally support. "She won't back down," the uncle was saying, his voice thick with frustration. "The lawyers, the court order. She's trying to ruin us." Well, if she won't listen to reason, maybe she needs a different kind of message. Something to remind her that Brooklyn can be a lonely place for a woman living by herself. Something to make her feel a little less safe. I stopped breathing. This wasn't a vague threat from an angry ex-husband anymore. This was a veiled, chilling promise of intimidation, a suggestion of physical threat. It crossed a line from a bitter civil dispute into something far darker. I sent the file to Sarah immediately. She called back within minutes, her voice devoid of all warmth. "They just handed us the keys to the kingdom, Em," she said. "This recording changes everything." "What does it mean?" "It means this is no longer just about hidden assets and a divorce," she said, her voice like chipping ice. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and now, with this recording, it's witness intimidation. These are federal offenses. We're taking this to the district attorney." The next morning, I met Sarah outside the formidable stone building of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. The gravity of the step we were about to take settled on me like a physical weight. This was the point of no return. We weren't just fighting for my share of the marital assets anymore. We were handing over a mountain of evidence, the systematic fraud, the hidden properties, the intimidation tactics, and asking the federal government to intervene. As we walked up the steps, I thought of the woman I was just a few months ago, the wife who believed in teamwork and trust. She would never have recognized the person I was now, walking into a federal building to submit a criminal complaint against her own husband and his family. They had wanted to erase me quietly. Instead, I was about to make sure their crimes were exposed under the brightest, most unforgiving lights imaginable. Handing over that final package of evidence to the district attorney's office felt like releasing a boulder from the top of a mountain. For months, I had been the one pushing it uphill, fighting for every inch, bearing its entire weight. Now, it was rolling away from me, gathering its own momentum, and I could only stand back and watch its inevitable, destructive path. We didn't hear anything for a week. The silence was a new kind of tension. The quiet before a hurricane makes landfall. Then, the first tremor hit. It wasn't a front-page exposé in the New York Times. It was something more subtle, more modern. A post on a niche financial blog, one read religiously by a small but influential circle of investors and executives. The headline was, "Clinical, NYC real estate firm under internal review amid allegations of illicit fund transfers." The article didn't mention Mark by name. It didn't need to. It detailed an anonymous executive at a mid-sized, family-run firm who was accused of using corporate shell companies to hide assets during a contentious divorce proceeding. It mentioned a property in Florida and a pending foreign investor visa. The details were so specific, so precise, that within Mark's world, it was the equivalent of a public indictment. The snowball started rolling. Sarah called me that afternoon. "One of my old classmates works at Mark's firm," she said. "The place is in chaos. They've hired an outside forensic accounting team. The partners are in damage control, trying to distance themselves from Mark as fast as they can." The professional reputation Mark and his family had cultivated for decades was his armor. It was the source of their power, their arrogance. And now, it was beginning to shatter. Within days, the story was picked up by a larger business journal, still withholding names but adding more detail. Mark, the man who had threatened that I would walk away with nothing, was suddenly becoming a pariah in his own kingdom. His partners stopped taking his calls. The company's bank froze their line of credit pending the outcome of the audit. He was no longer a powerful man facing a personal problem. He was a liability threatening to sink the entire ship. The arrogance that had fueled his family's attacks evaporated, replaced by a frantic, suffocating panic. The pressure campaign against me ceased entirely. There were no more calls from concerned aunts or threatening uncles. Their world was imploding, and they were too busy trying to find cover to worry about me. Then came the call I knew was inevitable. It was late on a Thursday night. I saw Carol's name flash on the screen and I almost didn't answer. But I knew I had to hear this. "Hello?" I said. The voice on the other end was unrecognizable. The icy, condescending matriarch was gone. In her place was a woman gasping for air between broken sobs. "Emily, Emily, please," she wept, her voice ragged. "You have to stop this. Please. They're going to ruin him. They're going to ruin my son." I listened, my own heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, exactly, but a profound sadness for this wreckage of a woman. She was a villain, yes, but she was also a mother, watching her world burn. "They're talking about charges, Emily," she stammered. "Criminal charges, his whole life, his career. It's all going to be over. You can't let this happen. You have to go back to them. Retract your statements. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding." Her words revealed a breathtaking ignorance of the world she had stumbled into. She still thought this was a family squabble, a disagreement that could be called off, a mess that could be swept under the rug if only I would be the good, quiet wife again. "Carol," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "that's not how this works. I can't retract anything. The evidence is the evidence. This is in the hands of the U.S. Attorney's office now. It's far beyond my control." A desperate, animalistic wail came through the phone. "But you started it. You can end it. I'm begging you, Emily. As a mother, I am begging you. Don't do this to him. Don't destroy my boy." I closed my eyes. Her boy, her son, a man in his late 30s who had conspired with her to defraud his own wife. "I didn't do this to him, Carol," I said quietly. "You all did this to yourselves." I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly. The immense pressure they had tried to exert on me, the campaign of isolation and intimidation, had boomeranged. It had flown back with the force of a hurricane, trapping them in the very corner they had tried to shove me into. They were no longer the powerful, untouchable family looking down on me. They were just a collection of terrified people, staring into an abyss of their own making, with no way out. And so, we arrived back where we began, at JFK International Airport, Terminal 4, amid the chaotic symphony of rumbling luggage wheels, multilingual announcements, and the weary footsteps of 1,000 converging journeys. For me, however, it was the end of one. My journey. The final divorce decree had been granted a week prior. It was an unceremonious affair, signed by a judge in a quiet courtroom, a legal severing of a life that had already been emotionally amputated months ago. Sarah had called me that morning. The U.S. Attorney's office flagged their passports in the system last night, she said. They're scheduled to land at 3:15 p.m. "You don't have to be there, Em." "I know," I replied, "but I think I need to be. I wasn't there for revenge. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to witness the closing of a door, to see with my own eyes that the ghosts of my past could no longer follow me into my future." So I stood behind the glass partition separating the sterile international arrivals hall from the waiting public, a ghost myself, invisible to the drama about to unfold. I saw them before they saw the officer. They came through the automatic doors in a triumphant procession, a conquering army returning from a successful campaign. There were 12 of them in total, a clan united in their deceit. They were tanned, glowing from the Caribbean sun, decked out in expensive linen and designer sunglasses. Their luggage carts were overflowing with duty-free bags, Chanel, Gucci, Hermes, the spoils of a victory they believed was already won. In their breathtaking arrogance, they had gone ahead with the trip. While their assets were frozen and a federal investigation was closing in, they had decided the best defense was a brazen offense. They had flown to street. Bartson staged a lavish destination wedding for Mark and Jessica, a final, defiant act of creating their new reality. Mark was at the center of it all, beaming, his arm possessively around Jessica's waist. She was laughing, holding up her hand to show off a new, ostentatious diamond ring to Carol. And Carol, she looked happier than I had ever seen her, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. She had finally gotten the daughter-in-law she wanted. She had won. They approached the Customs and Border Protection line, loud and boisterous, cutting in front of other, more weary travelers. They were a force of nature, an entity that believed the rules did not apply to them. They were directed to a single kiosk, and Mark strode forward, the patriarch of his new life, slapping his American passport down on the counter with an air of entitlement. I was too far away to hear the words, but I didn't need to. I saw the officer, a man with a tired, impassive face, scan the passport. I saw him look up at Mark, then back at his screen. He typed something. Then he typed again. The laughter from the family behind Mark began to die down as the silence from the kiosk stretched on. The officer leaned forward and spoke, his voice too low to carry, but his meaning as clear as the glass in front of me. Mark's confident posture stiffened. He leaned in, said something, his tone clearly annoyed. The officer didn't react. He simply picked up a phone. A moment later, 2 more officers appeared, their expressions unreadable. This is the moment I described at the very beginning, the moment when a quiet, procedural exchange became the epicenter of a life collapsing. One of the new officers stepped forward, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable authority that cut through the terminal noise. "Mr. Mark Peterson?" Mark nodded, his face starting to pale. "Sir, your residency status has been flagged for revocation, pending a federal investigation into wire fraud and conspiracy. You are currently inadmissible to the United States. Please come with us." Inadmissible. The word hung in the air, cold, sterile, and absolute. It was a bureaucratic term for exile. Carol gasped, a hand flying to her mouth, her face cracking like fine porcelain. "What are you talking about? My son is an American citizen. This is a mistake," she cried, her voice shrill. The officer turned his impassive gaze to her. "Ma'am, his citizenship is under review due to the nature of the allegations, as are the visas of all accompanying family members who are listed as beneficiaries in the associated financial structures." The blood drained from the faces of the entire entourage. The designer shopping bags suddenly looked cheap and absurd. Their sun-kissed tans looked sickly under the harsh fluorescent lights. Their victory parade had turned into a perp walk. The family, once a unified, impenetrable fortress, dissolved into a panicked mob of individuals, shouting, crying, pointing fingers. The sound of their world ending was not a boom, but a chaotic, pathetic whimper. I watched them being led away to a secondary inspection room, a drab, featureless place where their power and money meant nothing. Mark glanced back one last time, his eyes sweeping across the crowd, and for a split second, they met mine through the glass. There was no anger in his gaze, no hatred. There was only a hollow, dawning comprehension. He finally understood. He hadn't been fighting a scorned wife. He had been fighting the consequences of his own actions. I turned and walked away. I didn't need to see any more. I walked out of the terminal and into the crisp afternoon air. The sky had never seemed so blue, so vast. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound, quiet, and overwhelming sense of relief. The war was over. The ghosts were banished. And for the first time in a very long time, I was free. In the months that followed the chaotic scene at JFK, my life did not magically reboot. There was no sudden, cinematic transformation. Instead, there was a great and profound quiet. The constant barrage of calls, threats, and legal maneuvering was replaced by a silence so complete it was almost disorienting. The war was over, but I was a soldier left standing alone on a silent battlefield, and I had to learn how to live in the peace I had fought so hard for. The first thing I did was reclaim my space. The apartment, once a stage for Mark's lies, felt haunted by a life that was never truly mine. So, I began to dismantle it. I packed away every photograph, every gift, every piece of furniture that held a memory of him. I hired painters and had the walls, once a tasteful but muted beige of his choosing, painted in warm, vibrant colors that I loved. I sold the heavy, imposing furniture and replaced it with pieces that were lighter, more modern, more me. Slowly, the apartment began to feel less like a crime scene and more like a sanctuary. My work became my anchor. My design studio, the one thing that had always been solely mine, was where I poured all the energy that had once been spent on anxiety and suspicion. I took on a challenging new project, designing a boutique hotel in the Catskills, and lost myself in the creative process. In the clean lines of a blueprint, in the harmony of color palettes, I found a sense of order and control that had been absent from my life for so long. My clients saw a focused, passionate designer. They had no idea that every completed room was a small act of rebuilding my own soul. I reconnected with the friends I had drifted from, not because Mark disliked them, but because the sheer weight of my marital problems had made me an absent friend. We had long dinners, took weekend trips to the coast, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. I never made my ordeal the centerpiece of our conversations. I didn't want to be defined by my trauma. I was Emily, the friend who gave terrible dating advice but great design tips, the one who laughed too loud at bad movies. I was rediscovering the person I was before I became Mark's wife. 6 months after the airport incident, Sarah and I sat on my newly reupholstered sofa, drinking wine. "Have you heard anything?" I asked, the first time I had brought it up in a long while. She took a sip. "The legal machine grinds slowly," she said. "The federal case against him and his family is moving forward. It's a mess of fraud and conspiracy charges. He'll likely face prison time. The rest of them are entangled in it, financially and legally ruined. They lost everything because they were too greedy to lose a little." I nodded, feeling a strange detachment. His fate was no longer my concern. It was just a story about someone I used to know. "Do you ever think about dating again?" she asked gently. I looked around my living room, at the art I had chosen, the books I was reading, the soft glow of a lamp in the corner. "Honestly, I'm not lonely," I said, and the truth of that statement settled peacefully in my chest. I spent so many years trying to be the perfect partner in a team that I forgot how to be a complete person on my own. I think I need to get to know her again before I introduce her to anyone else. My ordeal taught me painful, invaluable lessons. I learned that trust, without transparency, is just a liability. I learned that financial independence isn't just a career goal, it's a lifeline. And I learned that my own intuition, the quiet voice I had silenced for so long out of a desire to be agreeable, was the most powerful tool I possessed. My story doesn't end with me finding a new, better man. It ends with me finding a new, better version of myself. It ends here, in this quiet moment, in my own home, on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. The light is streaming through the large windows, casting long, warm patterns across the wooden floor. I am sitting at my drafting table, a pencil in my hand, sketching the initial designs for a new project. The music playing softly in the background is a jazz piece I love. The room is filled with the scent of fresh coffee and the quiet hum of a city alive outside my window. I am not looking back at the rubble of my old life anymore. I am looking forward, at the clean, white space of the page in front of me, ready to design what comes next. And for the first time in a very long time, the future feels like it is entirely, wonderfully, and peacefully my own.